breakups can be such catalyst moments to transformation?
Largely, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. When we are in a survival response, our systems become fixated on ourselves. It becomes very hard to actually tune in to someone else. The shame I felt about the negative emotions did far more damage to the people around me than actually the emotions themselves.
When we can clear that fog of the thoughts away, or starting with being aware of it, is then we give ourselves a chance for authentic connection.
Through this emotional release practice, I've basically started being able to
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this.
Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And in this episode, so really, as you know, I record these intros straight afterwards, just so I can kind of hold the energy of what was talked about. But in this episode, I get to speak to a former client of mine, a man who I worked with for about a year. And we talk about, what he got out, the work that we did, the transformation and how that's impacted his life going forward and impacted his work, his purpose, his way of being in the world, his self-esteem, his confidence. And it's a really joyful way for me because, we haven't spoken on the consistency as we had obviously did when we were coaching together. And just to see how he's blossomed and how he's bringing such rich and deep wisdom to the world is such a pleasure. And to see how the work we did really impacted and has continued to impact his life. So this is a really beautiful conversation where we talk about, obviously we start off talking about some of the work that me and James did together. James is a multidisciplinary human being. He does so many different things. He's a coach, but he also makes music as well, makes some really beautiful music. I'm a big fan of his music and his albums as well. And we talk a lot about self-esteem and building self-esteem and the importance of values, how our values shape and impact our decisions, the way that we show up in the world, and also how we find purpose through our values and why they're so important. And we get really deep into the importance of values. And James talks a lot about how he helps people find their values and create them so that they can live powerfully, that they can shift from being lost and feeling disconnected into feeling really alive and energized. We talk a lot about the importance of emotional release as well, so we can live with freedom as well. There's a big theme of actually living with freedom through the episode, as well as we talk plenty about projection and story and how our projections we have of people and our stories have of people, how that harms our relationships, how it harms the world as a larger worldview as well. We talk about that plenty as well, which I think is a really juicy part of the episode. And we talk about shame and why shame is so corrosive. And James talks about some of his personal experiences with shedding shame and how that's created more freedom and joy in his life and freedom and joy in his work and his clients as well. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh shit, I'd love some more freedom and I want more joy and I want to be able to connect better with people, I want to shed some of my story, then this is what I help people with. And, you're getting to listen to James' experience and what he's taken away from the work that we do together. You can feel free to just pop me an email. My email is in the show notes. You can get straight in contact with me. But without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. So welcome, listeners. This is a very, very special episode, actually, because I'm speaking to someone who I know in multiple different fashions and ways. And the guest we have today, who you already know because I've said it just before in the intro, is someone who I work directly with. You know, he came to me a number of years ago and we coached together. I coached him through some really beautiful moments, and for actually a period, it ended up being a longer period of time than we thought, but there was so much synergy and so much beauty and transformation that I thought would be a beautiful episode to talk to him about that. But also the work that he does now with men is so resonant to like what I do and what many of the people that come on the podcast do around men, around purpose and meaning, because, you know, purpose and meaning is hard to find in this world. So we're going to really dive into those two bits and pieces. So I'm going to welcome today my guest, James. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing good, mate. I'm very grateful for you having me on it. It's great to see you, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, man. It's been a while. We've been always keeping tabs on what his little videos. James puts out some wonderful videos. I'll tell you his Instagram. The Instagram stuff will be in the show notes, as you know. But he does these beautiful videos in the woodland, beautifully shot, like lovely colors, like really, really powerful insights about life and purpose and meaning and being and the nature of being a human being in this world, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a bit. But yeah, I'm super, super glad to have you here today. And I'll start off with the question that you probably know. The question I ask most of my guests is, what has been your journey to do the work that you do now? Because I know, you know, you've done a lot of different things over the years. So it'd be beautiful to hear, you know, what's been your evolution to what you do now.
So my actual background is in advertising and marketing, and most of my career has been working in that. And I suppose there was quite a long period leading up to COVID where I already knew that it wasn't really an alignment for me, and I knew that I wanted to do something different, but I really didn't know what that looked like, what that angle might be. And then COVID hit and things kind of started shifting beyond my control. Most of the marketing advertising work I did was in events, and obviously that year there were no events. So very quickly all my work dried up. And along with it, a lot of the plans that I had for the future kind of went with it. You know, I planned to buy a flat in London that year. And yeah, all of my plans and all of the way that I saw my own value kind of fell apart really quickly. And I suppose this is the kind of the turning point for all of my work and for the work that I did with you as well. You know, I really lost my self-esteem alongside my fancy job title and my salary and things like that. And very quickly I got to really hating myself, actually, feeling very worthless because I didn't have, you know, the job and money coming in and getting my foot on the property ladder and being able to travel and, you know, have these nice things. And towards the end of that year, I split up with a girl that I was seeing as well. And it just threw me into this like deep depression, and I felt like I was kind of free falling, and I couldn't really understand why my self-esteem had crumbled. You know, I knew that I had a lot going for me, and I just couldn't really understand why I felt so bad about myself. And what I realized, largely through working with you and, you know, everything that I've been doing the 3 or so years since then, is that I'd attached all of my perceived value to these external, the material metrics of success. And so when they got taken away, my self-esteem kind of went with them. And there was a specific exercise that I did with you that almost feels like the turning point for me, that has had me slowly over the time kind of unpicking this and getting to like a deeper realization, which is that there is an underlying internal value that underpins whatever we do in the world that it doesn't necessarily have to change anything outside of us. But those internal values, if you really do live by them, they can't be shaken by anything that happens outside of you. If you really are grounded in these internal values, then your only purpose is to continue to tune into them and refine your ability to live up to them. And you can't really not end up in meaningful and purposeful situations. It's because you are driven by something that comes really from deep within. And so it doesn't really matter then what the job is that you're doing or where you're living or anything else. It's like this becomes a kind of guiding light for you. And so, as I said, that's refined for me over the last few years as a result of everything falling apart and for the work that we did and everything that went through that. And it's just given me such a feeling of lightness because I no longer feel like I'm grasping for, anything specific that I'm desperate till I have. It's almost like it means I can live so much more in the moment because I'm not worried about chasing anything specific. I could just tune in as a smaller increment of time that I can, and look at the decisions that are in front of me and choose the one that is most in alignment with who I want to be, and then just trust that that is me living up to who I want to be. And so, as I said, that's given me so much freedom and lightness that I now take that in my offering as a coach to help other men find the same. A lot of people who have achieved a lot of success suddenly get to a point of still feeling like, they don't have meaning in their life. And, we can see from billionaires that, this chase for more and more material stuff can't be satiated. Whereas if we're able to flip our awareness and come back to these internal values, they can guide our lives and provide meaning immediately where you are right now. So, that was quite a big, expansive way of explaining it, but I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, man. And it's interesting to me because, like a lot of people come to me, there's a dating thing, there's a post relationship thing. And I was writing something about this today. I was like, so many men come to me post breakup. I reckon about 60 to 70% of my clients come post breakup, or they're in relationship. Yeah, I'd say probably 40 to 50, actually, I'm exaggerating, 40 to 50% of people, because about 50% of my clients are single and other 50% are in relationship. But about 40% of the overall are men who are just like coming out of a breakup, right? And it's interesting to me how breakups can be such catalyst moments to transformation, and to start to see our own patterns. And I guess what I'm thinking is like when we kind of started to work together, what was some of the patterns that you saw were like playing out in your life, in your love life at those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely drawn to working with you because everything had fallen apart, but the real kind of thing for me was, I was with this girl that I really loved, and we broke up, and I really just couldn't understand what had happened. It had been 6 or 7 months by the time we started working together, and it was still really plaguing me, and I just couldn't really make sense of it. And I don't think at the time I really had much awareness of being able to see, what had happened. And it's only kind of through working and by looking back that I started to actually being able to piece it together. I can see that because all those things got taken away and my self-worth started to plummet, I very much attached all of I was grasping for my ex-girlfriend and became quite needy because it felt like she was the only constant and the only piece of stability that I had. And I feel like I wasn't giving her some stability and being consistent in her life. I was really putting all of the pressure and the emphasis on her because I felt like all of my value had been taken away as a result of those things that had happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like I'm sourcing meaning and value from looking at your partner and hoping that by being a good partner and showing up as a good partner, that then you would feel like that sense of like, I'm being a good man, for example.
Absolutely. As I said, it's that when you're fixated on the external things and you're grasping for them, like the other ones had been taken away, and that was all that remained. And I really put all my effort into the relationship, but like not in a healthy way. That's me, putting everything to make sure that everything's fine, and I'm not going to upset her or anything, because I was worried that this last part of my life would be removed at that time. So
it's just destabilizing when it does kind of like fall apart. And like you said, it's like, it really, sometimes we don't realize that we've put so much of our self-esteem on like work or our partner or our job title or our car or the house we have or the money we have in our bank. And then when those things disappear, it's like, oh, fuck, who am I? Or we feel that we have no worth. And I was thinking the other day about this. I was like, I'm in the process now of like remortgaging my flat. And I was like, oh, if I had to sell my flat for some reason, I had this sense of dread come across me. And I was like, wow, that's the part of me that thinks that I don't have any worth or value if I don't have these assets in my life or these things or whatever. And I in that moment, and this for myself, I was like, I really get why. So I always remember the financial crash in 2008. I remember going home on the tube, and I remember one day the tube on the Central Line was like shut down because someone had committed suicide on the tube. And I remember at those times I'd be like, man, like, why would anyone do that? Like, blah, blah, blah. But in that moment when I thought about having no assets and having all this monetary stuff gone, I stopped and I was like, man, I can see how if I continue down this thought pattern, that I will see no other option other than like ending my life, and see that as the best option for myself, for my family, to get away from this pain. And like, I know it's been a fairly long process for you, post that. But it sounds like through some of the work that we did together, like you started to, as you said before, is like connect to this internal self-esteem, this internal values that can't be taken away, that can't be lost. And
it's really interesting because you can flip to the internal value without even having to change anything necessarily outside. And I'll give you an example of it. So if you think your value is in your fancy job title and your salary, and you get made redundant, then, you very, very possibly you could end up depressed, be in that whatever downward spiral, people can end up in as a result of that. An internal value that is representative of that could be that you will do whatever it takes to provide for your family, right? And if that's your value, even if you lose the job, you can, get a job in a cafe or stacking shelves or whatever it might be, or, like go and hunt a deer if you have to feed them, right? Whatever. But it's like, there is a core value there that is internal, that can't be shaken by the outside world. You can always do that, right? And so when you're really grounded in values like that, it doesn't really matter what happens outside. You'll just do the best thing that you can to maintain that. And I guess that's what it comes down to, really. It's identifying who you want to be, how you want to show up in the world, and then refining your mental image of that, and then living up to the ideal of that man in any situation. Is the way that I see it.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I remember the conversations we had about values and worth and meaning. I remember some of those conversations, and I remember some conversation about joy and experiencing joy in life, because sometimes for us men, as you've probably seen, it's quite hard to kind of experience joy. And I wonder for you, like, how did shifting your values and the time we were together start to allow you to experience life from a more joyful place?
Yeah, as I said at the start, living from this place and being so much less attached to any specific material thing in the future just means I feel so much more in the present. And there's just so much more of a lightness. You know, I really suffered from quite severe depression for, I'd say, a big chunk of my early 30s. It right up until COVID, really. And I was really in it heavy. You know, when we started working together, I was really suffering, and that continued until the following year. And you know, after Vipassana, we had a call, and I feel like that was a big kind of turning point for me, and it kind of broke a lot of this, broke me out of a lot of this. But yeah, you know, the more that you can live in this place of like seeing how you want to show up, you don't really care too much about like, you know, what anyone else is doing, even, you know, like people's judgments and stuff. It doesn't matter so much. And having that lightness just means that you can be a bit more playful. You're more than happy just to make the most of where you are, what's going on in the moment. And yeah, there's just a lightness to it that is lacking in the world. You know, I think you can really tell someone who has that difference, who is living in a more grounded place like that, you know, because they don't really give a shit what other people are doing, what they're saying. They just, okay, whatever you need to do is fine.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, and it feels hard for us to do that when there's so much fear about judgment, what other people think, you know. And I've just finished running a 5-6 week program about dating, and the most common fear for the guys in there is around judgment, around fear of judgment. The single biggest thing that comes, I'd say fear of rejection and fear of judgment, they're pretty close up. It's like those are the primary fears that kind of stop people from like living the lives they want to do, loving the way they want to be, being the authentic person they want to be. You know, because it's as if we experience those as like absolute blockers to our existence.
Yeah. And you know what, I think this is so relevant there as well, because the more that you really know those internal values, and the more that you have a real crystal clear idea of, as I said, the man that you want to be, the more that you're able to discern the people who are a good fit for you. And I think going into dating, if you really know your values, if you really know what you stand for, where you're going, then, you know, I know that like beforehand, I would be a little bit like, you know, trying to kind of maneuver with a date and please her and, you know, whatever it might be. Whereas now it's like, I'm actually more interested in figuring out if someone really is in alignment with me. And that just allows you to sit back and be a lot more observant and present and aware, and actually be discerning and be like, you know, you're a lovely girl, but actually I don't think we're right. I don't think this is going to happen. So, you know, there's so much from that place. It almost feels like, rather than you chasing and being told by the world, you know, what's available, suddenly you're a bit more of like a creator. You're a bit more in control of it because it's coming from you outwards rather than the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's funny because it's funny to talk to you, and I kind of remember a moment for you, and correct me if this isn't quite right, where there was that literal shift where you'd seen in the past, like you were always like, I don't know if the term maneuvering and massaging, I think were the words that we'd use. And like, oh, how can I make this into the thing I want it to be? And there was a real shift for you, a moment where you were like, wait a minute, I'm in this to like see, is this person someone I want to spend time with and be with and connect with? Not trying to convince the situation or convince them that I'm a fucking great person. I know I'm a great person, and let's see if I can receive them and that there's like a synergy between the two of us. Yeah.
And, you know, like, I mean, a big part of it, and you know, obviously is the name of your work as well, like the authenticity, right? Most of us don't know what our authentic selves look like. And it's really hard to find. And the way that I see it, though, is like, when you're trying to find it outside and you think, you know, what's the right job for me? What's the, what do I want to do with my life? And you're looking for that in specifics of different job roles or whatever that might be, then you're kind of shooting what's the phrase? Shooting in the barrel. No, shoot in the dark.
Shooting in the dark. Crabs in the barrel.
Yeah, like, I mean, you've got, as many options as there are in the world, right? Whereas if you're actually coming at it from here, it's like, well, what actual options do I have that are available to me right now? And then what's the best thing that I can do that feels most meaningful to me? And you're driven by that. It's the way I see it is it's actually being more in tune with reality, because you're really paying attention to just what's in front of you. It's nice to think that we have unlimited choice, really, but like, we really have whatever's in front of us, whatever's in our awareness, and the impulse that comes up from within us, whether or not to take action on something, right?
And for so many people, the awareness is filled with the thoughts and fears and worries about self. Like, am I good enough? Is this person going to like me? I'm worrying. I'm fearful of this, the future, blah, blah, blah. So it takes up a lot of space. And I often use an analogy of like fog, because we're British, there's plenty of fog we see in our lives, where you could be on two sides, one opposite ends of the football pitch, and you see your friend across there, but if there's fog in the way, you can't really see them. You see an outline of a human being, but you're kind of making up what's happening, and this fog, which is our thinking, our fears, our patterns, our worries, gets in the way of us experiencing people authentically and allowing people to experience us authentically. And when we can allow that fog to kind of fade away and be cleared away by the morning wind or however fog clears, we can actually start to see that person and actually also receive ourselves as well in a way that's like, this is who I am without all this overthinking, this worrying, this fear of judgment, this fear of rejection. I can see the reality of who I am, of like, I'm a fucking great person, actually, with good morals and great standing, and I love people and I've got a big heart, and I can see this person in front of me and be like, this person's amazing, but actually there's no alignment with what we're wanting to create in our lives, and that's okay. Totally. Like, we can be with that. If that's a date, if that's a best friend, that's a business partner, and we can part ways and we can feel good about the way we've operated. But the key thing in here, and you say there, and I've used my analogy of the fog, is like when we can clear that fog of the thoughts and all that stuff away, or at least starting with being aware of it, is then we give ourselves a chance for like authentic connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And you used the word in there, you said receive, and like a real big part of this is you might call it, like, I'm going to use a bunch of different terms here, and they're kind of the same, I think, but I guess there's nuance between them. But like, masculine and feminine energy. I also think it's head and heart. And I think particularly masculine and feminine is so loaded that we get tied up arguing about the meaning of it, that actually it just becomes really unhelpful now. So I'm trying to avoid it. And the best that I've come up with is an active energy and a receptive energy. And part of the reason why I think masculine and feminine gets a bit messed up is because we see it like on the polarity of it as like opposite ends of a spectrum, rather than, I think it actually is meant to be a flow. It's like an inhale and an exhale. And so, individually we have these energies. We have it in relationship. We have it in our company, in our family, whatever it might be. And I think it's meant to be a flow, like an inhale and an exhale. So in our culture, we're a bit stuck in the masculine energy. We're stuck in the active energy. And, you'll know from men's work, things like we did king, warrior, magician, lover, where, one of these archetypes can be overindulged or it can be repressed, right? And so if you're stuck in this active energy of making and building and consuming, without it being tempered by an underlying meaning of like, why are we doing this? Then you just have like unbridled consumption, unbridled whatever, with no real goal or purpose. And that largely is like what's going on in our culture at the moment, right? And so when you start thinking about an inhale and an exhale, suddenly you have, well, we're like, we're like full to the brim and we're still trying to gasp more air in, and we can't. And we can feel the pressure and the tension of that. So what we need is to have the pause, the receptivity, which is you have to get quiet. You know, we were saying earlier, I'm up in Scotland now and I'm out in the woods for 2 hours every day. And I've only been here a couple of months, but like now I just can't believe what a difference it makes for me just to spend that time out there and get quiet. It's like I gain insight and clarity like nothing from that. So, you know, I've also spoken about it, like I see life being like a conversation, which is like you sit there, you wait for your situation, your environment, your wherever you are to inform you of what's needed. The receptive part of it is sitting there thinking about, you know, actually how can I contribute in the most meaningful way? Once you have that clarity, then you can get into your mind or into the masculine or into the active energy, and you can make a plan and you can go after it as best you can, and you can, you know, achieve that thing. But then you need to pause again and actually look around again and see if we're still on track, whether we're veering off course, you know, what's going on. And so I think it's meant to be this flow back and forth of take action, observe, get quiet again, listen, receive, realign, recalibrate, and then move forward again. And I think that's really why we're struggling so much at the moment. You know, there's a lot of really good men's work around reclaiming healthy, strong masculinity. You know, there are definitely a lot of men struggling. A lot of men feel weak or ambivalent about the world at the moment. And you know, I'll come back to what I said about these archetypes as the example that could be out of balance. So you can either be overindulged, where you know you can already know what that looks like in masculinity, and like the repressed version as well. It's like ambivalent, like dysfunctional. But the way that I see it is actually, as a culture, we're so stuck in this unhealthy, masculinish, active energy that we don't often have the time to get quiet and actually tune into what's needed first. You know, I think most men, if you give them a really clear to-do list and they know it's for a really important job, they'll get it done, right? If you don't know what you're aiming at, what's the point, right? That's why so many men are just feeling like kind of giving up hope, because it's like their job feels meaningless. You know, they don't feel like they're contributing in any meaningful way. Like men want to feel like they are needed. And until you can slow down and actually figure out where you can put your energy that is going to make the biggest contribution, like I feel that's where like our meaning comes from. You know, I got there's a base level of that for most men. It's like if you like feeling like you're contributing to your family is like the bottom of the rung that you are that you find your meaning. But when you spend the time to focus in on what skills that you have, what's important to you, and you find this kind of middle ground of how you can use all of that to create the biggest contribution to the most amount of people, that's where meaning comes from.
And it's interesting because, you know, when we're talking in the realms of people finding like meaning and purpose, like I'm sure you experience this in your work. I'll go back to my analogy of the fog a bit because it's still relevant here. It's like they don't have that time to rest. And when they do rest, you know, they do step into the feminine of like, and I'll say this before I carry on, is like what you described there of like the action, the receptive resting, the action, the kind of overlooking viewing. It's like, it's very much, you know, I worked in software for 16 years. It's very much like the iterative process. It's like, oh, we're going to do some work. We're going to look back on how that work went, what went well, what do we need to change? Boom, we'll take those and then we'll move forward. It's just this constant like stopping, looking and moving forward. And as you said, as a society, we're just locked in like action, more, bigger, better. And we don't have much respect for the kind of sitting in the woods and just listening to the trees and having some rest and taking, you know, nature being, you know, we call it Mother Nature for a very good reason, and just being nourished by that to give us presence and give us energy to then take action and move forward. And what I see with a lot of men is that they're so stuck in the doing, and they have been for many years, that when they do rest, what occurs to them is they can't shift out of the gear of doing, because they're staying in the head, right? They're staying in the thinking and the worrying and the second guessing, and even the like multiple branches, and thinking about those and trying to figure out what the best thing to do, instead of actually being receptive. They're trying to actively think through the things that haven't happened yet, and not really looking back in a way that's like meaningful, because their minds are so foggy. They can't really look at the reality, as you mentioned earlier. It's like looking at reality of things and going, okay, what have I actually done? How do I feel about what I've done? Like, is that meaningful for me? How do I want to move forward? Their minds are so clouded with so much junk, some worry, their patterns, their fears, emotional reactivity, and all sorts, that they can't actually grasp at like any of the meaningful data points and information from what they have done up to now, or in their jobs or in their careers or with their purpose. Would you say that's one of the big reasons why, in your experience, like you're seeing men they're feeling so lost, because they're unable to kind of grasp at what's really meaningful for them?
Yeah. And, this is so big and complex, because the further along you are in your success and the more responsibilities you have, at some level, there are almost like blocks to you doing something different. It's very easy for you to get yourself down a rabbit hole where you're doing work that doesn't feel meaningful to you, but you have to do it because you have the big mortgage and you've got 5 kids and, you got whatever it is. And so for people like that, it could be really hard, because it's like, well, how do I do anything different? And I have to grind and I have to work this hard to be able to do it. A small shift can just be, like I said, if the shift is from feeling like your value is the monetary to actually understanding the underneath bit of like, I will do whatever it takes to provide for my family. Like, even that, if you can fully grasp it and you fully accept it, can give you a level of peace and meaning. Like I said, during COVID, I was doing everything I could to support my partner and help her with everything that she was going through. And I wouldn't want to change any of that. But because my focus had been on the material stuff that had gone, my self-esteem was in the gutter, because I felt that's where the value was. Whereas if I continued to do the same things that I was doing, but I actually believed that was the valuable bit, then the energy that I bring to that would be very different. And so you can make these shifts wherever you are, if you can really understand what underlies it. I can't remember what the question was now. That was another point.
Is this is the way in which we are living kind of life so fast, and we're full of thinking, and we're full of fear and worry and anxiety, and fear of rejection and fear of judgment and so forth. Do you see these things contributing to why men feel kind of so lost in their lives, and what they're not knowing what they want to do with themselves, or just feeling lost even in the world we live in now?
So I think that our culture largely are stuck in a collective trauma survival response. And largely it is disconnection and loneliness, and that kind of sits at the core of that. And the thing that the reason that this is so interesting is, when we are in a survival response, our systems become completely fixated on ourselves, because for survival, and it becomes very hard to actually tune in to someone else and really genuinely be with someone and to support them. And I think that it becomes a kind of self-perpetuating thing where we end up ghosting people when we go on dates, or whatever it might be, because we're focused on like, oh well, I don't want that discomfort and whatever. And it's all unconscious, and people aren't doing this deliberately. But when we're so caught up in all of that stuff, it does mean that we can't tune into how we can contribute. Like I said, I really believe that the contribution is at the core of meaning. When we're focused on what's how do I survive, how do I look after myself, we're actually distancing ourselves from being able to find how we can how we can support the greatest number of people. And largely there's a lot of healing that needs to be done to help people clear that and get back to it. I went to see an emotional release bodywork therapist over Christmas back in London. Her name's Claudia. She works for her company's called One Body Therapy, and she really flips my understanding of the way that we store emotions and trauma. The practice that she guides you through is you breathe with her. She puts her thumb on different kind of pressure points around your chest, around your body, and then she has you express whatever sensations are going on inside your body. Kind of use your body to almost describe them to her. And that sounds a bit weird and woo, but basically what I understood from it is that very often when we have tension in our body, we think it's like the result of our traumatic life experiences or whatever have left us with these kind of like aches and pains and things. But what I understood was that it's actually our unconscious that has suppressed an impulse, an emotional impulse, because it felt like it wasn't acceptable to release it. So as an example, if your dad was going to like give you a backhand when you were a kid and your body wanted to fight back and you went to fight, but you thought it would make it worse, and so you suppressed it, there is an emotional charge that's been released in your body that needs to complete. There's energy there. And when you don't allow it to complete, your body is literally tense to hold it in place. And so if over your life you have had an issue where you've not been able to cry or you've not been able to express your anger or whatever, you are holding all of this stuff in. You are keeping this energy in place. And if you don't have an opportunity for it to complete, it will remain there. And that keeps, all these thoughts as well, of these traumatic experiences, this all related. The thoughts that we have, they're related to the sensations in the body as well. So through this emotional release practice, I've basically started being able to listen to what my body wants to express, and it can look very dramatic. It can look like fighting. It can look like screaming and clawing and whatever. But it is allowing me to complete all of those energetic impulses that have been suppressed throughout my life. And the more that I do that, the more that all this energy comes back into my body. And I now see it as, I don't really care about the narrative of things that happen to me anymore. All I understand is there's an energetic block. And if I can allow that block to clear, then I know it's healing. And it's shifted so much stuff for me that, like I said, I don't get caught up in the stories anymore, anything that happened to me. I don't really have anyone that I hold blame towards anymore or anything like that. It's always just been shifting because all I care about is getting rid of the energetic blocks in the system, And so many people that I speak to, I can see are just so caught up in their patterns and their stories about what things mean, and rationalizing that just, it's almost like their perception of the world has become funneled smaller and smaller and smaller. And I see people that are almost like confined in these little psychological boxes where they can barely move because, they're trying to hold everything together and perform perfectly rather than actually feeling and experiencing what's underneath it. And it's kind of heartbreaking to watch, actually, because things have to be felt to be processed. You can't get away from, if that impulse was there, it has to be expressed to clear the block. And our culture has set us up to feel like having an emotional breakdown or a big emotional explosion is to be frowned upon and it shouldn't be welcome. But actually that is how we heal, and that's how we clear stuff. And what I found, and this is a big thing that came through working with you as well, was the shame I felt about the negative emotions did far more damage in my relationship and in the people, to the people around me, than actually the emotions themselves, and the way that I'll explain that is, a lot of us feel like it's not okay to cry. As a man, it's not all right to we feel like it's weak to cry. If you are a 20-stone rugby player and at the end of the game you're crying, and no one's going to say a fucking second thing to you, right? Because you're like a strong, like capable man, and you don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. So you're going to let it go, right? And so if there's shame around expressing an emotion, the way I see it is that at some level there's a feeling like maybe you question whether you're strong or whether you're capable. But if you do cry and you genuinely don't care, most people won't respond negatively. There might still be a little bit of cultural conditioning where people, maybe I do, but like it's the shame and the discomfort. When you meet someone and they're feeling ashamed and they're like trying to hide their anxiety and whatever, there's like a stickiness to it that people respond really badly to. And so all of this is just the blocks to our freedom of expression. And the way I see it is that all of this is just accepting as much of reality, as much of the human experience as possible. And I really think that actually is almost the best definition of masculinity, maybe even just all of humanity, really. But it's like, can I be okay in this situation as it is? And if you can own all of it, then what's there for anyone to say? Nothing's going to rattle you.
And yeah, like when you say about the shame we feel about certain emotions, like negative emotions or emotions we label as negative, we put so much energy, because I'm hearing that from you, there's how can I allow more and more my energy to flow? And you've seen through your own experience and, the work that we've done, the work that you've done since, is like, when I'm blocking, when I'm trying to find a way, when I'm holding on to shame around this negative emotion, maybe that's like a fear or a worry or being seen a certain way or whatever that negative emotion that we don't want people to see about us, we put so much energy into suppressing and holding it, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, right? Holding on to it. But when we start to allow the shame, we consciously remove the shame through whether that's practices of like cognitive practice of thinking or body work or other somatic practices. And we allow that expression just to come through as it needs to be expressed in whatever way, whether that is tears, whether that is screaming into a pillow, whether that is, putting up a boundary, for instance. We are like feeding back to our body to release that energy, to release the energy it needs to be held, but also we're simultaneously telling ourselves, you can be free.
Come on. Absolutely. It's so weird because we've culturally learned that all these things are acceptable. But as I said, that's the only way to clear all this stuff, and the energetic difference is astonishing. And as I said, that once you start seeing it leave and this stuff clearing, I just have been like, well, I don't care about any of the story anymore. I don't care who did what, like whatever. It's like there's a block in me. I want it out. Once it's out, if I'm not in pain, I'm not going to blame anyone, because like, why you wouldn't care? Because if you're not hurting, then it is what it is, right? And so there have been times when I've been doing this stuff when it's been particularly, dramatic, and it looks a bit like an exorcism. My entire body's like writhing and stuff. And like, I'll be wailing and fucking screaming and but also laughing at the same time, because it's like, there's not really an emotional, like a heaviness anymore, because I think the shame's the biggest part of that. And it's like, and once the story's gone, it's just like, it's just clearing stuff. And so I will go there anytime now, and there's no shame. And when I do it, actually, it's fucking primal. It's like, it's just this like wild beast, like writhing around. It's like, I have zero shame about like going there anytime now. I'll cry any opportunity.
It's like sneezing now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Giving you
Feels
a
good, man.
space to like just feel. Yeah. I think this is it's like a really beautiful part of what I've experienced in like some of the men's work I've done, and even some of the other retreats I've been in, is like giving ourselves the space to feel and express what we've never allowed to be felt and expressed before. And it can seem like, oh, you know, what's the value in doing that? But like, it's actually quite a profound shift and change, because when we spend a conserved period of time in our life just being like, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm feeling frustrated right now, and I'm in a space that I can express this frustration, you know, I feel I'm in a suitable place to express this frustration, and I let that frustration out, like the attunement to our own feelings and emotions increases. Our attunement to other people in our space and around us increases. The mental chatter and stories that you've mentioned, they start to dull down, and we have a more expanded experience of living, whether that is to connecting with our loved ones, connecting with our partners, being able to show up on social media and speak our truth or say what's meaningful to us. Like, it really has these knock-on effects in all these ways. And I say this because, you know, as listeners, sometimes we're like, oh, how is this going to be useful to me? But it's just like, actually, this is useful in every aspect of people's lives, like across the board.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the way that I see it is like, it's like, imagine like we are this big sieve, and whatever you put in the sieve is like all of our trauma, all of our life experiences. If we like leave it alone, most of it is like being sieved. And if you just are there and you're calm, most of this stuff is clear in itself. But like when we are in environments that are stressful and tense, and we, you know, end up in traumatic relationships and whatever else, the tension of it holds that stuff, and it stops it from clearing, and it stops it from being released. And so these practices are just a way of us clearing this stuff out quicker and quicker. The other thing that came to mind is one of the first times when I really understood this was actually working with you. And I remember a particular time where I can't remember what I shared, but there was something that I definitely had some shame around. And you listen to all of it, and then you just kind of pause for a minute and, you know, thought about it. And you responded to me, and you pretty much word for word just said what I said. You didn't try and fix anything. You just made me feel so fucking heard, like really, that you really understood me and you were there. And after that session, I had this massive energetic release, because that shame, you know, that shame was all being held in, and being in an environment where I could share that and wasn't judged and just felt heard by another human, that released it. Okay. And so I really try and push for people to start trying to work their relationships into a place where they can be really deeply honest about their thoughts and feelings and interpretations of different situations, because, you know, we all carry so much distorted perspective about everything in our lives. And when we don't talk about it, you know, I remember saying this to you as well about, like, you know, if you're sat down next to your partner and you kind of have a chat about your relationship, and you both got a piece of paper and you're going to write a story about your relationship, if you're not actually sharing it, then, you know, within a couple of minutes, your story could be in like completely different like areas, right? Just because of, you know, all your perception and all your baggage and your experiences that you're putting into this. And like, none of your perception is real. It's just the way that your mind has organized reality as best as it can into something functional. And so when you can genuinely set your relationships up with people and be like, hey, look, I know I'm thinking loads of bollocks, and I know that you are. And so if we can sit down and just like, I'll show you these stupid things that I'm thinking. Some of them might be really hurtful. Some of them are judgments about you, but I'm going to do it. And I know that it's bullshit. And then you can do the same. And then between us, we'll then try and course correct as a pair. Then, you know, you actually have an opportunity to get rid of a load of the bullshit that you're thinking and actually have an even more intimate relationship, because it's genuine and it's authentic and you're sharing everything. But the thing that gets in the way of that is shame and worry about the judgment and everything else. But by both sitting down in the first place and being like, look, I'm not judging you. You can say anything. And I know that my stories are bullshit and I know that yours are. But how about we just put them on the table and see what we've got? You know, it's like, why are we not doing this?
And it's you know, when you say that, it's beautiful because there's just like, you know, like I work with couples as well, as you know, so I see how this really plays out with two people right in front of me on a screen or in person, and we don't realize, you know, as you said, we have these two stories we're writing. It's almost like there's a beautiful video that could be made out of this, and you're far more artistic than me. It's like almost like two people, and you say to them, you know, tell me about what your relationship is like. Right. And there are two people back to back to each other, and you haven't told them they can't talk, but they don't. And they just start writing, and you kind of see what they write come up on the screen. And you're like, wow, like this is like two different relationships here. And it literally is what you're saying. It's two different relationships. And then they're like, I don't want to show you what I've written. I don't want to show you what I've written. I'm not willing to say honestly what it is because I'm scared that if you know what I think, you won't love me. Or if you know what I think, it's going to hurt you. It's like this egoic piece that's there. That's like our ego's like, oh no. And then if they do swap them, which I've seen happen with partners, is our ego just reacts to it. Oh, you said that thing that unconsciously my dad used to say to me when I was a kid, which reminds me that I'm not good enough. And we personalize. And it's when we can kind of come out of that personalization and be like, actually, I'll use me and Orsa as an example. Orsa's thoughts about me have fuck all to do with me, really. It's all about how she sees the world, and it's not a personal attack on me. It's just how she sees the world. Then I can receive what she says about me, and I might be able to even observe the reactivity of like, oh my God, you just said that, like, you know, I don't take enough care in emails that I send. And I'm like, oh shit, you know, fuck, when I was at school, dyslexic, so I used to hit all this thing. But I can receive it as like, I know that that's the story I'm running. I don't react to her from that story. And it's such a, you know, this creates the most authentic of relationships, you know, especially in a romantic sense, because it gives space to and acknowledges our utter ridiculousness of the stories that we tell ourselves and thoughts that we have about other people. And when we I feel like when we give each other the space to do that, we acknowledge that like those thoughts are not who I really think my partner is. They're just the thoughts of my like fears and worries and anxieties about myself. We separate that, and we're able to kind of look at that as a third way of being, like, you know, in my head, or what I see about also is this third thing. And then we can actually really get to know each other a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And, you know, I feel like this is a good reason for doing the work to get clear on your values, ideally before you're in a relationship, if possible, because it's like the more that you have that understanding in the first place and you can kind of align things in the right way, it's like you can start things from that place. Is so much easier than like doing it when your stories are like miles apart, right? Because there's misunderstandings upon misunderstandings to try and unpick, and any of them could be a trigger and a judgment where someone's going to get offended like really badly. But you know, that's not to say like I think most people, the kind of core values, there are a lot of them that are quite consistent, and particularly for me, it's around like, you know, integrity and truth as far as possible, and non-judgment, because I know of these stories. Like if you can really sit down and have a conversation with your partner and be like, these are the things that I really want to focus on for our relationship, and that means we need to do these difficult things together. It's like, it's going to be like, shit, here we go. But like that can only make you even more intimate or show you that there's misalignment, right? And I mean, it depends what you want, but like awkward.
yeah it is, but it really and it's, I always wonder, like, is it better, you know, I say this as if I don't know what I think the answer is like, is it better that we are in a relationship where we're pretending and we're pretending all the stuff we don't like about each other isn't there, and we just focus on the like happy love and light? Or is it better that we journey through the difficulty, the pain, the story, the judgments, the projections, so that we're clear on what those are?
Everywhere.
And we're both clear, and we both can see like, look, in that moment there, you just projected onto me that I was assuming that you're being selfish, and I wasn't doing that. Like, I can use an example from my own relationship. I think a couple of days ago also asked me a question. There's certain questions she'll ask me, and I can see where I make the answer I make the question more than it is. And it's usually about ask me what I'm doing or when I'm going to be finishing. It's around timing and like what I feel impacts my freedom. And it's very normal for us to have for her to ask me a question, for me to be like, I don't know. And I use this example a lot on the podcast. And then she'll say to me, she's like, David, I'm not trying to, tell you what to do. I'm just trying to figure out, like, if you're going to do that, then I'm going to do this other thing. But if you're going to be here, then I'll do something with you. And I'm like, oh, it's like it snaps me out of my like fucking story of worrying about whether I'm going to be free and autonomous. I can do what I want. And to some people, if they hear that, they would be like, oh, wow, that seems a bit rude. Just there's times that we can be very direct with each other, but it's because we've had the crying and the, not necessarily shouting. It's more me is like shutting down and going silent when we've had something like that happen. Like she said something to me about timing or something like that. And then I've felt triggered, and then I shut down, and then she gets upset because she feels distance and blah, blah, blah. Because we've been through all that and we've surfaced it, and we're like, oh yeah, her story's around being close and having, time together. Mine's about having my time apart. And we see that our projections are our own, that we can actually then just get to the things that we want to do and have the conversations we want to have. It's like when you own the thoughts that you have and the fears that you have and the story that you have, and you really can take it and go, yeah, I know this is mine. This is more my shit. This is definitely my shit. Then I think really deep intimacy is possible, because then we allow that kind of really authentic part of us to shine through and be seen and be witnessed. And I think one of the reasons why people often shy away from this is that we think that if we show someone that shit, that story, that they're going to really hate us and want to reject us. And actually what I've seen, and I even saw it in a workshop being also around a couple of weeks ago, is that when we show people who we are, we give them the opportunity to show us who they are. And in that is a very healing experience, because we just accept each other. There's no shaming. There's just like, oh, you're like that, I'm like this. Cool. It's like when we are able to be seen and just be witnessed and heard and understood and accepted, the shame we have about ourselves and the things we feel shameful for start to crumble away and fall away.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Huh? The projection thing, that's been a big part of this for me as well, because what I've realized is anywhere that you're blaming someone, there is an attempt at emotional projection there. Because like I said, I said earlier, if you're not hurting, there's no one to blame, because it's like there's no emotional charge there, right? So if you are holding blame to someone, it is an attempt for you to offload an uncomfortable emotional energy onto someone that you see as being responsible. Maybe they are responsible, and in which case, in a healthy dynamic, maybe they'll own up to it and help you release some of that emotional burden. But they're not necessarily responsible. And the way that projection works is that if we have an uncomfortable emotion that is more than our system can hold, our system is trying to maintain equilibrium, and it will unconsciously look around for people that it can offload that onto. And so we will find reasons to blame people to allow us to try and give them that energy. And a projection will only stick if there's a seed of believability in it. That means the other person will accept that energy. If someone insults you and you believe them, you will like feel the shame, or you'll feel embarrassment or whatever, and you will take that energetic load on. If they insult you about something that you definitely are not embarrassed about, you'd be like, fuck off. No, like, you're not going to take on that energy, right? And so that's how it works. But, you know, you can see, as an example, if your dad, again, has his own shame wounds and whatever, and he had a busy day at work and he was stressed and everything else, and he came home from work, and like, you as a kid, you're running around, you're making a lot of noise, like his system is trying to maintain equilibrium, and might like be like, well, the kid's making noise, and take it out on the kid as a way of like of releasing some of that emotional load. He might well feel a lot of shame and regret and everything afterwards, but in the moment, the projection was a story that made sense for him, that like the kid's making noise, and so therefore it deserves my anger, right? And that's how this projection works. And it's actually, we had this uncomfortable feeling that we're trying to offload. And once you start like really seeing that and the energetic shift of that, that helps so much for this as well, because it's like when you sit down with your partner and be like, well, I blamed her for that. Like trying to like work back and be like, you know, what energy was going on in me? Was there anger already? And you know, that's such a big part of actually being able to genuinely see each other, when you can start reclaiming these projections. Because if we just go around believing the thoughts that are in our mind, like this all narrative, it's all story, and it's all an attempt for our system to try and find this equilibrium of energy and get us in all sorts of trouble. So, you know.
Yeah. And it's funny, you touched on something there. And I was thinking, when it comes to projection, like the place we have the most projection with our parents, you know, our parents. That's one of the places you know, I've been doing some EMDR therapy recently, and you know, I've been speaking about my parents for like in some sort of self-development way for probably 15 or 16 years. And, you know, so much, we can become so clear with everyone else in the world and so forth. But with our parents, we hold this like special way of projecting onto them and blaming them for so many of the things they do. And I feel like I'm seeing more now, and I'm accepting more now, that there's like a bit of an onion ring kind of effect with our relationship with our parents. It's like I shifted some really big stuff personally with my dad, like, you know, probably 12 to 15 years ago. And it's really interesting to see how there's still like little bits of grains of things here and there that are still there. And it's like, I think it's a really important part of finding our own personal freedom, is actually, you know, as much as listeners, you may be thinking, oh yeah, I've had a, you know, good relationship and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, you have, but there's always these little bits and pieces that are there that we can often be really unaware of, that like little bits of anger that, you know, that time that our dad shouted at us, and, you know, how we are still reacting to that in our system and in our bodies and our mind, that actually gets in the way of us being completely free, with them, but also again in the rest of our lives. Because I sometimes think that we can be so awakened in many areas of our lives, and then we have to talk to our parents.
Yeah. Well, you know, we worked on a lot of stuff with my dad while we were working together. And one of the things around projection that came up with him was, you know, that year I was in such a dark place. And towards the end of the year, I, you know, decided I wanted to confront my dad and sort of bring up a few things that I had always played on my mind, and, you know, just have a share some things that had hurt. And so I took him out for lunch, and I tried to set it up in a way of like, you know, this isn't an attack, but I just feel like there's some stuff to be said. And when I started telling him these things, he kind of shut down, and he started coming up with all these like really unusual excuses that didn't really make much sense to me. And then he was struggling to get his words out. And then he got really kind of angry and frustrated at that as well. And I realized that he was in a trauma response. He was in this kind of like shame place. He got shut down. He was like a little 6-year-old or something that had been told off for, you know, I was kind of basically had told him, you know, that he hadn't been present enough as a dad. And he was like a little naughty schoolboy. He was like being scolded for it, right? And I went and sat with this for a long time afterwards, really thinking about it, and realized that these things, his traumas, are still playing out in his life and in the way that he's behaved with me. But also that my problem with him really was because I wasn't happy in my life. Like, I was really in a bit of a mess, and this emotional discomfort was so much that I was struggling to hold it, and I was looking for someone I could blame to take some of that load from me. And it's like, if my dad had been a better masculine role model, if he'd been more present, then I wouldn't be like this. I was like, well, I'm a fucking 38-year-old man, right? It's like, I probably should have my shit together on my own by now, irrespective. And so there is that really sunk in for me, the fact that like the projection is, if we hold this discomfort, we're looking for someone to take the blame. And you can't just trust that story on face value because there's so much like more depth to it than that, right? And the more that we can set up our relationships in this way, that we can have these genuine conversations and be like, this is a story that's coming up for me at the moment. It may or may not be true. I'm not judging you, but like, can we just play around with it and see what's really there? If we have a chance to do something differently. But we've got a lot of work to do, because there's like this fucking knot that's compounded over the whole of human history, really, to this point, all this ancestral trauma that's passed on and everything else. So it's going to take some time just to like unravel that.
Yeah. The blame is like, we live in a society. You just got to look at a newspaper, and look at how blame is like apportioned. Or you watch politicians. I spoke to someone yesterday for a podcast episode on here, and he was talking about we were talking about our nervous system and the responses, and he said, we get into this kind of fight or flight state, this nervous system's arousal, and our minds are kind of shut down, and we're not really, we're not in that space where we can actually take information in or understand. We're in defensive mode, or we're in counterattack. And he said he done some work with politicians, and it kind of triggered me to think, if we looked at if our politicians are able to communicate from a place of like, groundedness, being able to be in that shifting between, as you said, the masculine and feminine of resting and receiving and hearing, having an open mind to listen, and a mind that's free of the story, or at least able to observe the story of blame, we'd have a really different way in which our politics would play out, and our news cycles would play out. Like you can see in all the world affairs we have, is like, ultimately there's this like, there's somewhere that someone's pointing a finger and going, you did this, so now I'm going to do something in return to you. And it's just playing out all these generational trauma, like new trauma that we create because of the old stuff that's happened, that really locks us in the cycle of trauma and continuing to respond from that place.
I don't really watch much TV, but Succession, there's a program, but it's about like kind of media mogul family, right? It's like a kind of Murdoch, Maxwell kind of like that kind of vibe. And I was thinking about that recently, because, if you imagine growing up in like one of the big like dynasty kind of families where like they're so competitive, they're so like money driven, whatever. Whereas a kid, you don't really get like proper love. You're kind of like almost played off against your siblings, and everyone's kind of like out for themselves and stuff. Like that going over generations in some of these cases. Like imagine how twisted up your mind would be of like not having genuine love, always having to fight for it, always having to be sneaky, like always getting backstabbed by people who are meant to be close to you. And the way that you perceive the world and the way that you interpret, how we should interact, how we should treat other people, like that is traumatic. That's a traumatic influence that has led to that way of thinking. And people can't see differently than they've experienced. Like you can't expect that person to have this experience of like love and light and everything else, right? There's a quote that I reference quite a bit. It's an African proverb that says, the child that doesn't feel the embrace of the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And it's like, I really feel like this is one of the hardest things of blame, where we're blaming people for things that they're doing. And, we need to stand up for injustice, of course, but like people can't have a different perception of the world than they have learned from their experiences and from their environment and stuff. And so people who are doing really horrendous things, their projection and their narrative justifies it at some level of there's a reason why they're doing it, right? And to ask them to change that, you're basically trying to rip apart their personality. And so all I mean is there's a lot of work to be done in terms of like helping course correct that, right? And when you come at these things face on, people are just going to fight you and they're going to resist, because you're basically just questioning their entire existence. And there's a lot of this in the world that's way beyond our individual capabilities. And largely, I believe that this comes down to starting at home. It's like reclaiming our own projections, setting up our relationships and our families in a way where we can have these honest conversations and we're not blaming each other. And that's our real core focus. Do that work ourselves and then allow it to ripple out, I mean, I would love to be able to like go and solve world peace like right now, but start with what you've got, pay attention to your own environment first,
Yeah. And I just add to that, like, we often look at the wealthy and the world leaders and stuff and the privileged, and like they are as traumatized as everyone else, right? It's not from a case of me saying like there is some sort of trauma Olympics and someone's going to be a winner and it's like, oh, they got more trauma than other, but they are all equally traumatized in their system, the system that they've grown up in, the environment they've been in, and they are reacting out of it in the same way. Just because they have money and power doesn't mean they're at all immune to it at all. And they're just in their system of, like you said, like they don't get real love. They're always fighting for the love. They feel that the only way they can get love is by producing and succeeding and winning and all those ways. So they tap into like, oh, well, the more I do, the more I succeed, the more power I have, the more love I'm going to get. And it's just another toxic dynamic that causes us to play out existing cycles in the world. But it's not immune. It's not just the poor and the homeless and the addicted that are traumatized. It's also the wealthy, the people you see on, like, whether it's celebrities, whether you see it's like royal families. Like we've come to this point now, especially with Prince Harry and his memoirs and stuff, which I haven't read, and obviously you hear about. It's like you see that there's this trauma that runs at all levels of society. Yeah. No matter what privilege you have, you just have a different flavor of trauma that you're experiencing.
Absolutely. Yeah. It runs through everything, and I really now believe that these emotional release practices, grieving, is necessary throughout life to clear this stuff. Like back to like certain tribes in Africa where like once a week the whole tribe will get together and they'll like have a fire going and they'll dance around the fire and they'll scream and they'll cry and they'll purge like whatever's happened, even just in the last week. And in the West, we go our whole lives and we just fucking bottle it all up. We ain't going near it, So there's a depth of stuff that has to come out here. And I also think, that it's like we have to grieve the life paths that we have to let go of that are never going to make it. Like when we make a decision to be like, okay, I commit to this. Like, I'm never going to go play football for England now, and I have to like get over that. You know what I mean? It's like these things have got to, you've got to, there's grief to be done to let go of these things, and there should be emotion and there should be sadness to not have these opportunities that at one point we might have dreamed of. It's part of the process, and it's part of how we clear and maintain that equilibrium that I spoke about. And when we've culturally learned to suppress it all, we can't hold it in, and it's like a boiling pot. And when we can't allow it out in a healthy way, that's when we take it out on everyone else. That's when we're blaming. That's when we're throwing these barbs. And it's our own personal responsibility to deal with the energetic blocks that we have ourselves. And then, put your own mask on first, and then, deal with everyone else.
Yeah, most definitely, man. Yeah, I'm just thinking of the number of times that, like, I hear and I see this in couples, or I see it in people in general on social media. You're like, oh, you need to do X. They're like, I'll do that when they do this, when they do Y. And you're like, oh man, that's how the world works. That doesn't work. That we just end up in cycles there where we have to take responsibility and go, okay, I need to fucking do some work with my reactivity, my defensiveness, my need to like counterattack or be right, instead of pointing the finger at my partner and going, hey, or my friend or my parents, and go, they need to change. And then I will change, because we know that it doesn't work like that. It doesn't actually work when we operate from that place.
Yeah. And there's, I just want to touch on, there's another thing relevant to that. But part of this coming back into your own core values means that you can guide yourself in most situations, because I think many people get attached to like looking for the technique or the formula that's going to give them X, Y result, whatever. And what I've seen in certain areas of my own development is that I've sometimes had vastly opposing perspectives on almost the same situation. But it's like the certain angle was very much needed at a certain time. And so when you're looking for guidance from people external to yourself who don't know your story, who don't know the nuance of what you've been through, they can't give you an accurate advice on what you should be doing. People can be there for guidance and they can support you while you kind of come to your own conclusions. I think that's really healthy. But there's been points where I needed to get in touch with anger to be able to, if I've suppressed that for so long, I need to find a way of expressing that. It might come out as an overreaction in the first place because there's a lot of suppressed stuff, and then find my way into like a healthy expression of that. There's been situations with certain people where I've needed to speak up and tell them things that needed to be said. There's another point where I can come back and have like a lot of compassion for that person and understand their pain and everything else. And then there's another place that I've got to where it's like being able to maintain a boundary with someone and be connected and have compassion at the same time. And that is particularly difficult because people's trauma, it's like a little black hole that wants to be energetically fed, and it's kind of coming for you, and it's going to provoke you, and it's going to push your buttons to get you to either react or to take the load from them. And trying to like hold your ground in those moments and being like, I know this person's hurting. I know it's not about me, but also I'm not going to take that on. That's really difficult, but that is really where the kind of core of the work comes to. For me now, it's just like, I'm not going to try and fix anyone. They've got to take their own responsibility for their thing. I'm going to be here. I'm going to try and stay loving. I'm going to try and stay connected, but also I'm not taking your stuff. So sorry.
I feel that's a great t-shirt. I'm not taking your stuff. Sorry.
So British.
My trauma bucket is full. I'm not taking your stuff. Sorry. Oh man, I feel like you're gonna be run a bit over time, and yeah, man, it's just been such a pleasure to talk to you, because it's been, I guess for me, from my side, is like to see, I was recently looking back at, I was doing some work around, the clients that I really enjoyed working with, and like looking at what they said when they first came in to work with me, and looking at some of the notes and looking at some of the emails even, and some of the forms that filled out, and to see like how you've grown and how you shifted your own life in these last years, and it's like 2024. Where's the time gone? It's just been so amazing, man. So amazing. And to like have this conversation and to like really like, take on your wisdom and see, where you've taken your life and your work and your business and what, finding your meaning and purpose has just been, it's so joyful to me, brother. So thank you, man, for today's conversations. This has been really, man, I feel really both humbled and excited and grateful to get this opportunity to speak to you in this context.
Yeah, thank you, brother. Likewise. I mean, you were such a core part of my healing that year. I really was in such a dark place, and as I said, you were just there, judgment-free, and supported me while I opened up all of this really dark and fucked up shit that didn't really make any sense. And you were really instrumental for this change has come through me, and I'm massively grateful for you and for you inviting me on this call as well. Thank you, brother.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, listeners, you've got to peek into some of our worlds and what the conversation and thoughts that we have. This episode is pretty, as often as a couple of questions, but the conversation is just weaved into the magic that's in our hearts and then that's poignant to us and like what's been really present for our own shifts and growths and changes. But yeah, James, I imagine that the listeners are really dying to hear some of your videos. And I'm going to say this again, like the videos that James shoots are like really beautiful. The colors are wonderfully balanced. He's usually in the forest. You can hear a bit of the forest behind. Where can they hear more from you? Where can they find out how to work with you in the different ways that you work?
So my Instagram is James Garside. I also have a YouTube channel, which is at embrace-everything. And my website is embrace-everything.com. On there, I have a new coaching program, which is called Lead from the Heart. And it's a 12-week transformation journey, diving deep into those core values and understanding what's important to you, what you stand for, and finding that kind of deeper purpose to give you motivation. So, thank you, mate.
Beautiful, beautiful. And listeners, if you've listened to this and you're like, wow, I've taken so much, like get in contact. It's always lovely to hear from people, get messages. And I know some of the other guests that have been on, I've heard messages from people about what they've taken from the episode. It's always a real pleasure. So don't be shy in coming forward. It's always beautiful to hear what people are taking and learning from these conversations because, a conversation can change your life. It really can, listening to one or having one with a friend or family member or partner. So, always remember that. Like a conversation could be a really powerful tool for our own awareness and shifts and insights. Well, as we get to the end, as I always say, thank you very much for listening. I say, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. Especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.